Okay, everyone, and so welcome back to the podcast. And today we have Belinda Crowson with us. And Belinda, you're with the GALT in Lethbridge, and also the Lethbridge Historical Society. And so I put out a tweet actually not too long ago, and I said, "Does anybody in town know anybody with an encyclopedic knowledge about ghosts and ghost stories in Lethbridge?" And within probably 30 minutes, I had about 4 tweets back, and every one of them mentioned your name. So there you go. So welcome on board.
Well, thank you for having me. I don't know if I want to be known as the ghost lady, but that's not so bad.
How'd all this get rolling for you? We're talking about ghosts.
I'm a historian and storyteller, and what I like about the ghost stories is the story part of them. And so I started collecting them. Of course, you know, when you work at the GALT, you can't help but know about ghost stories.
Right, because is it George?
George is
there, yeah.
Best known one that we have,
okay.
Though there are others, of course, reputed to be there.
Oh, okay.
And started just to want to know them so I could tell them. Yeah. And then I started realizing that there was the stories themselves were almost like artifacts, and I wanted to collect them and have a record of them now.
Right.
Because when you tell them, you'll hear them back about a year later, and they are changed and modified, and usually bigger than the story you actually collected.
Okay.
So I wanted a good record of them so we could say, you know, in this year, this is the story, because they are living organisms in a way, but you also want to know where the beginning was.
Sure. Okay. And So when did all this start
I've probably been collecting them now for about 10 years and off.
Okay.
And I've got stories now from the Crow's Nest to Medicine Hat.
Okay, so it's all of Southern Alberta then, it's not just Lethbridge.
Absolutely, and there's been a lot of great people who've emailed me and sent me stories, and some of them I still need to respond to, so sorry people that I haven't got back yet. But I just constantly find them.
Yeah.
And I have got a blog that I was doing for a while on ghost stories, and that people found me through that.
Okay.
So various different ways.
Now, have you published these stories? Or
Nope, that's the eventual goal, and
okay.
I know people are like, would you finally get that done? But it's so hard to know where to stop, and because it's a growing organism, right? And so at some point I'm going to have to sit down. To be fair to me, I do have 6 books on the go. So,
oh, wow.
So this will get done someday.
What are your other books on?
I'm working on Prohibition.
Okay.
I've got a folklore one that's going right now called You Can't Make This Shit Up. That one is the closest one.
Nice.
That one should be done in not too much longer. I've been working on one, a children's one on short stories. I've got one that I've been working on with the city. Actually, we've been doing an ABC of Lethbridge history.
Okay.
That we've been putting
out.
I
think I saw something about that.
In the Rec and Culture Guide.
Yeah.
And then I'm working on one sort of Lethbridge by the decades, and there's all kinds. And then the ghost story, and there's a few. And
okay.
I've got 4 published already.
Oh, wow.
But it's a slow process when I just can't stay home all day and write, you know.
Fair deal. So, I guess, and you do too, you also do the cemetery.
Right.
So, tours, walks, what do you...
I wrote a book called Vice, Virtue, and Lust on Lethbridge Cemeteries.
Okay.
And I also do the cemetery tours. I do daytime ones, we do school programs, and probably the one people are most familiar with are the flashlight cemetery tours that we do in fall.
So what sort of things do you cover in those?
Everyone is a different thing. The daytime ones are sort of walking conversations. They change depending on the questions, and it can be the iconography, the symbolism, it can be history of the cemetery, biographies. Those ones can go in any direction.
Okay.
The nighttime ones are very much a script. So if you came anytime, you would hear pretty much the same story.
Oh, okay.
And it's night. It's supposed to be for adults. And I like to say I focus on people who died in strange ways and things like that.
Okay.
Murders and suicides. And the first person arrested by the mounted police in Canadian history is buried in Lethbridge.
Oh, seriously?
Oh, yes.
Okay. What's the story behind that person?
He was a whiskey trader. And
okay.
He was just the first. He and his group were the first ones the mounted police came across when they arrived in 1874.
Okay.
So we had a gentleman who was tarred and feathered.
Literally?
Yeah, literally. And the person committed suicide, and the community blamed this other gentleman for being too friendly with the first one's wife. And the gentleman who committed suicide is buried in Lethbridge.
Okay.
So we can tell that story and all sorts. And I don't know why anybody would think history is boring. The way I look at history, I gossip about dead people. And with me, ghost stories are the same thing. It's just continuation of the story.
Yeah.
And is it true or not? I don't make any claim to that.
So you're not a medium. You're not
Gosh, no. I have no psychic abilities.
Do you know any mediums? Just out of curiosity, that might be interesting to have on the show. Yeah.
I have actually, I have had the great honor of touring people through the museum and places like that who are psychic or say they're psychic, and I have none of that.
Okay.
But I like to listen to what they have to say and respect it. I don't know if there are ghosts. I know corner of the eye phenomenon. I know we can make ourselves believe a lot of things. So I recognize all that. But I've also had some amazingly credible people tell me some amazing stories.
Okay.
So I'm not going to tell people there are or aren't ghosts. I just want your stories.
Very. You just want to publish.
Exactly. I like to share.
No, I know. Yeah, it's part of the history thing too, right? It is kind of a cool thing. Yeah.
As a storyteller, there are few things more fun than sitting around a campfire and freaking everybody out.
True story. Yeah.
My favorite, my big family gets together every year. My cousins, we all go camping. Yeah. And when you can sit there and tell ghost stories till midnight, 1 a.m, and not just me, but everybody doing it, that is fun. That's how camping should be.
Fair deal. So, what's the scariest one you've got?
Probably my favorite, and I try to block this out of my head when I do the cemetery tours. Okay. Because the cemetery tours are historic and these aren't, so I try to keep them completely separate.
Fair deal.
But there is an amazing story from St. Patrick's Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
There's the part in the Catholic cemetery where the headstones are over the side of the coulee.
Okay.
And it's where at one point unbaptized babies, etc., were buried in the unconsecrated area. Because of poor record keeping, etc., there are no records for that area. And a mum lost a little baby girl, buried her there in the unconsecrated area, but couldn't afford a headstone. Years later, she finally has the money, but she doesn't remember exactly where the baby is, but she puts the headstone where she believes she is.
Okay.
And as she and the monument maker are climbing up the hill to leave the cemetery, they hear a very sweet voice saying, "Mummy, I'm over here."
Oh my.
They look at each other and they realize they have both heard this.
Yeah.
So they go back down the hill and they move the headstone to where the voice was coming from.
Okay.
Now they're getting ready to leave as fast as they can when they hear that same sweet voice say, "Thank you, Mummy."
Freaky. Yeah. When is this? When was this?
We don't have a date. That's the problem with these stories.
Sure.
But it probably would have been 30s, 40s sort of thing.
Okay, yeah.
So certainly...
So passed down the family, sort of?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that's always the difficulty. I try to record who tells me the stories.
Yeah.
But I get a lot of stories second and third hand, as you might well expect.
Sure, yeah.
And it's always the difficulty because I know as a storyteller I need permission to tell stories. In different cultures it's even stronger. But sometimes you have no idea where they originated.
Sure.
So if I have, unfortunately, stolen somebody's story, I'm so very sorry about that. But, nobody's ever claimed that, so that's good.
Fair deal. Tell us, so a lot of people who listen to this may have heard the story. There's a lot of, believe it or not, there's lots of international listeners to this podcast. Believe it or not. But, can you tell us stories about George of the Galt Museum in Lethbridge?
I'll tell you the true history, and then we'll also talk about what people believe has happened. So it is February 1933. George Bailey is a 60-year-old farmer from the area. And he comes in for surgery. We usually say he's going in for an appendectomy, but it's either that or gallbladder or exploratory. It's not really clear what is going on. He's anesthetized on the main floor, put on the bed. The bed is pushed down the hallway and onto the elevator. When the bed gets halfway on the elevator, the whole thing messes up. A nurse upstairs pushes the button for the elevator, and with the bed halfway on, the floor starts to rise. Oh. And it actually kind of crushes George, and he slides down and falls down the elevator shaft to the basement.
Yeah.
He's up and laughing about it when they get down to him, but he dies later that night of injuries, and it's internal injuries that will actually, cause his death. Because he had what I would characterize as one of the more interesting ways. I mean, that's not the best way to say it. Death. Anything that's sort of happened has been, claimed to George. But people have reported black shadows watching them, blue lights floating down hallways. A person who worked in the basement reported shuffling feet sounds coming up to his office, and when he went out, there was never anybody there. But as much as people know about the basement, when we have a report of something weird happening, it actually tends to more often be the old children's ward than actually the basement.
Oh, really? Okay.
We have reports of about a 6-7-year-old girl and a 10-12-year-old boy who actually are up in the old children's ward. People have reported seeing them wave out the window.
Oh.
People have reported lights turning on and off when they shouldn't be. People have reported hearing singing coming from empty rooms, all of those sort of things. And we had one janitor who actually said the kids were, the lights would come on and off, and she would actually say, okay, it's time to go to bed, and they'd shut off.
Seriously?
Yep. And that's the only, I mean, I've been there many years, but that's the only room that's ever really freaked me out.
Do you get a sense? Like, I know you said you're not a psychic or a medium, but do you get sort of,
you never know if it's because you're tired of your imagination.
Yeah.
But there are times I just know I'm not supposed to be in that building.
Okay.
It's just time to go home.
Yeah.
But in that room once, I was up there with a group, and I think it was Navy cadets. I can't remember which group. But I opened the door, told them all the stories. I shut the light off. It turned itself back on.
Oh.
Yeah, I shut it off. It turned itself back on. After the third attempt, I just said, okay, we're out of here.
Yeah.
So I locked the door. We went and continued the rest of the tour. And about an hour later, the parents are coming to pick the kids up.
Yeah.
And the leader says to me, he goes, do you know that light is still on upstairs? I'm like, I don't care. I said, I'm going home. So he kindly stayed with me while I set the alarm. We locked the door. We went outside. And we were standing in front talking. About 10 minutes later, he's like, wonder if that light is still on. So we both looked up at the building, and that room was now pitch black. But as we were looking up at a locked, alarmed museum, the light turned on. That freaked me out. But
that's a little freaky.
That's not the worst of it.
Okay.
Because of our reputation, we also get people who are ghost hunters.
Sure.
Right? They come in with the cameras and the recorders. And all I have to do is take them through, and they will experience whatever they want. I took a group down, and they were amateurs out of Calgary, but they were a fun group, and we went through. A week later, I got an email from them going, you won't believe what we caught. They said, we caught a man's voice on the recorder. Right after you told the story about the lights, the man's voice says, I told her I wanted the light on. They're like, if you come to Calgary, you can hear it. I've never gone to hear it.
You've never gone to hear this? Oh, that's worth the drive right there.
I know, I have to work in that building.
You could go to IKEA, and then you could go see the recording.
Yeah, I don't know if they still have it. It was a few years ago. But it's those sort of things where you go, okay, so what is going on?
Yeah, that's wild.
Well,
so I was going to ask too, actually, in the museum, outside of the museum. So, I mean, Lethbridge, right now, without giving the address away, we're sitting in probably about 110-year-old house-ish, apparently owned by one of the guys that used to own a coal mine around here.
Okay.
Actually, my roomie's former roomie they were digging up the basement when they first moved in here, and lo and behold, there's a mine shaft in the basement.
Right.
With pulley marks on the beams, apparently. I haven't really looked all that hard. But, so there's some older places in town. Any cool stories about, older houses and that sort of thing in town that you're aware of?
We have some stories of some houses. I must admit, I've collected a lot more about public buildings.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But I have a few house ones. And
not this house, right?
Not this house,
okay.
No. Well, not that anybody's told me. Remember, I just collect stories.
True
Somebody
story.
have to pass it along. But the public buildings, it's unbelievable which ones we do have. I think a lot of people probably knew the St. Michael's one.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
Well, when it was the hospital, there was a nun that was often seen, and she was dressed in white, and it's like she never quit work. She was there still protecting patients. We heard stories of curtains moving, so that if somebody needed the attention, she would move the curtain to call them over. Stories of the nurses being thanked for sending the nun to sit with the patient overnight. And of course, there was no nun.
No nun, yeah.
IV bags being knocked off if they were overdue, like not just put on the floor, but across the floor, and showing that they were no longer any good.
Wow.
All sorts of stories from there, and it's one of those ones when that old building went down. We asked people if she was still around, and there's people who say that yes, Sister is still doing her rounds there.
Okay.
So there's a really neat story there. The Bowman has one of the most strangest stories.
Oh.
It's a story of somebody who didn't die. I know. According to the legend, and the person who everybody says this happened to claimed it didn't ever happen. So it's one of those weird ones. But people still hear what they think they're going to hear? I'll explain.
Okay, yeah.
According to the legend, there was a young Chinese girl who went to school there, and she was dressed in something that would be considered boys' clothes, like it was pants. She went into the girls' bathroom, got caught by a teacher who thought she was in the wrong washroom, and then beat the student for before she realized. And according to the legends, you can hear the crying of this young girl in where the girls' bathroom used to be. Well, I told that story once to a bunch of students, and afterwards a student came up to me and says, I finally understand. I'm like, what do you understand? She goes, I used to go there for dance classes and stuff, and my friends and I always heard crying. Oh. And everybody said, oh, it's the wind, it's the wind. And we're like, no, it's not the wind. Yeah. She goes, now I know what I was hearing. So people hear that what they think of as crying, and yet the story that supposedly started it didn't happen. So it's one of those really strange stories.
Maybe it's from somebody else. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe not necessarily that student. Yeah.
I'm sure there were a few kids who got the straps or things in that school over the years. So it could be. It's like, and I always like to go track them down. I think one of my favorite was the YWCA. Oh. The YWCA has a few different ghosts that some of the staff talk about, but there's a male ghost in the private areas. And they're like, why would a male ghost be attracted there? And so I sat down with a bunch of the staff and I said, well, let me do some investigating. And they knocked down a house. They had the old YWCA and they knocked that down to build a new one. And then I'm like, oh no, they knocked down 2 houses because there was another house behind.
Oh, okay.
So I went and I'm like, oh, I feel so silly because that house was owned by Lethbridge's first permanent dentist, Dr. Robert Chesney McClure, which is an awesome name. Yeah. He was best friends with General Stewart. Okay. And they liked each other so much, he married General Stewart's sister. Okay. And General Stewart married his sister. And then they built houses across the street from each other. Nice.
It's like the Gramasians in Edmonton with their underground tunnels.
Yeah, they really liked each other. Okay. But Dr. McClure died very young. 1915 he died. And he died in his house, I believe. But I know for sure his funeral was there. So on a whim, I took a picture of him, went back to the staff and said, does he look familiar? They're like, that's the ghost.
Oh, seriously? Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of the guys back then looked the same, but that kind of freaked me out when I'm going, well, I think we know Dr. McClure just never left.
There you go.
So, I mean, he's a kind dentist wandering around. Hope he's not checking people's teeth or anything at night. But.
Yeah, no kidding. So I mean, so far you've told relatively benign stories or, of benevolent, entities that may be there. And you talked about the knocking over stuff and whatever, but, that's actually kind of doing everybody a favor that's there. Any stories of the not so pleasant kind out there?
Not really in Lethbridge.
No Amityville horror stuff going on? No.
The weirdest one I've ever had is there is a legend that children can see ghosts better than adults can. Right, yeah. And that a lot of people's imaginary friends may actually be ghosts and they outgrow them. Yeah. And I got invited to a group of mothers at a play thing with their kids in Tabor. The kids were playing and they asked me to tell ghost stories. And I explained this theory because we were just talking about where ghosts might come from. And this one mom got very quiet and said, oh, my daughter's invisible friend lives in the oven and has glowing red eyes.
Little freaky.
Yeah, that was one of the ones you're going, really? So there's ones like that, but yeah, nothing that I've heard of, scaring people out of houses and, anything like that.
No exorcisms or anything like that.
A lot of them just seem like fun. There's one kid was down in the river valley with his mom walking and came running over and asking him permission to go play with the other kids and got very upset when mom said no because he saw the kids, mom didn't.
Oh.
So we've got ones like that. Where it's like, and not surprisingly, the High Level Bridge has a ghost.
Well, that kind of makes sense.
It's a child.
Oh, really? Okay.
According to the legend, and I'll explain why I say legend on this one.
Sure.
There is a little young boy who was challenged to ride his bicycle across the High Level Bridge, but not in the bridge, on the railing of the bridge, so on the top rail.
Okay.
According to the story, he got halfway across and fell to his death. But fell so fast and so hard that when he hit the ground, no sign of him. He disappeared.
Oh.
And they say if you go on a full moon and you stand in the right place, you can watch him trying to complete that ride across the bridge.
Every time there's a full moon?
But, this is why I say legend. Okay. It has to be a full moon and you have to stand in the right place. But the story doesn't tell you what's the right place.
What the right place is, sure.
So that's why I think that one is more in the urban myth in that legend. And you get those. We have some of the hitchhiker stories.
Sure.
Those, and quite often those ones, you wonder if they're just not part of the entire North America story. So I try to separate the ones that have no origin from the ones that, so,
Yeah.
and I'm not an expert, I'm not a folklorist, but it is fun to try to find the start. A lot of them start in schools because kids freak themselves out. I think every school now has a ghost in the kids' minds.
What about the college and university? Any there?
Oh, the university has some awesome ones.
Oh, seriously?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
There is supposed to be one in U-Haul who committed, well, after what happened, I probably mean to say, but committed suicide. People have experienced that. Probably one of the most odd ones is the library building.
The new one?
Yes.
Oh.
People have reported that they'll be down in the bottom floor and they will notice a man sitting, just staring at them, just sitting there doing nothing.
Any idea what he's wearing? Or
I've heard the description, but I couldn't tell you exactly.
Okay, yeah.
But the story that I've heard is people will then go report that to security.
Yeah.
And before they get done, security will say, he looks like this, 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 and this, doesn't he? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, don't worry, he's not really there.
Okay.
And again, it's always, because people try to link the stories to history, we do know one person died in the construction of that building, an electrician.
Oh, I remember that. Because I went to university when they were actually building it.
Right.
Yeah, I started my first year and ended in my fourth, so yeah.
And people claim that that's who it is. I mean, probably trying to make sense of it all.
Okay.
And so I've never met anybody who's actually said it. I've only heard this like fourth hand.
Right. Yeah.
So it would be interesting if, somebody who actually ever heard it saw a picture, because then you'd actually be able to see. But that's the claim there.
Okay.
And then of course there's all kinds of awesome stories out of the from below you
in the dungeon there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean that place is just ripe for ghost stories.
Okay.
It's long hallways and everything.
Yeah.
But footsteps, and often high-heeled footsteps and strange noises. And if you ever get a chance, there's some awesome videos on YouTube. I don't know whoever made them, but there's somebody went ghost hunting there and freaked themselves out.
Oh, seriously? Okay. Huh.
But I find the university, again, being a school, is always interesting.
Yeah.
I also collect myths of Lethbridge history.
Okay.
Like strange things people believe. And there's one getting perpetuated at the university now, that the city knew they were going to build something on the west side, but they didn't know if they were going to get permission to build a university or a prison. They thought they were going to get permission to start a prison, so they started building a prison, and then got the university permit, so that's why it's built the way it is. Right?
Arthur Erickson would be a little mad at
He'd be
that.
rolling in his grave, right?
The ghost of Arthur Erickson will come and haunt people who say that. Yes.
But I don't know where that started, but I've actually had people ask me now, is this true? And so it's one of those things going, no, not at all. He did plan to make a brick building and had to change his mind.
Oh, okay.
But no.
You all was supposed to be brick?
Yes. Yeah, that was one of the designs.
That would have been a lot of brick.
And that was the problem.
Yeah.
Because of the cost, he had to quickly redesign in concrete.
Oh, okay.
But it would have been an amazing brick building over there.
Yeah.
So that, there is the change, but it was always a university.
Okay.
No prison, nothing like that.
I'd never heard that one.
Oh, yeah.
That's...
Yeah, there's some awesome ones, again, off topic, but I think my favorite, and I've actually had people challenge me on this, but I know I've been asked it.
Yeah.
Is it true that the Hutterites, the Hutterian Brethren, only came to town on Thursdays because it was legal to shoot them any other day?
Oh, well, I knew they came Thursday, but I never heard that part.
Yes, unfortunately, I have been asked that.
Okay.
And I apologize to every parent out there, but when you usually ask somebody, where'd you get that story?
Yeah.
Usually parents.
Okay.
Yeah, parents, I won't raise your kids, you don't teach them history.
See, that's almost a cross between two different stories that I've heard. I mean, I knew about the Thursday thing.
And that's true.
But that hasn't been that way for a long time, though, right?
Well, but originally it was, and it's more from... Everybody's on different colonies.
Right.
So you set a day that you know the others are going to be in town so you can visit.
And you socialize, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It makes perfect sense when you actually think of it.
Sure, yeah. And but the one I've heard in terms of the shooting, I've heard it wasn't the Hutterites. I heard that there was a rule on the books, a bylaw on the books, that you could shoot a Mormon as long as he was walking away from you.
No.
That's not
or
there.
the other one, that the Mormons had to live all 20 miles out of Lethbridge.
Oh, I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, that was the other one. And that's where the irrigation towns were. I know a past city clerk and a couple other city clerks, and I know people who have read basically every bylaw No.
Okay.
Nothing like that. You can't shoot people in Canada.
Well, no, and that's why, it seems a little silly, right? But, Lethbridge does have a bit of a interesting past to it. A little bit of
Yes, we have and some of the Mormon communities did threaten to boycott Lethbridge.
Oh, seriously?
Oh, yes, over the red light district and alcohol and gambling and all of our fun stuff. But they were having fun. We weren't going to shoot anybody.
How did we not turn into Vegas? I mean, seriously, how did we not turn into Vegas North? I don't understand.
We had a really good potential up until the 40s.
Okay.
And in my feeling at the 40s, and my dad's a farmer, so I probably shouldn't say this, it's kind of like that farm conservative takes over after that.
Okay.
And so people say we've always been conservative. No. We had the first Labour MLA in Alberta was out of here. And again, I hope this is an adult content.
Totally. Yeah, you can say whatever you like. Yeah.
My favorite quote about the red light district, because I studied that a lot.
Yeah.
A Calgary reporter once said the coolies were formed by men humping their way to Lethbridge.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
So we did have a wild town and a coal mining background and all that. And I think that plays into some of the ghost stories.
Yeah.
I think if you know Southern Alberta well enough, if I told you a ghost story, you could actually link it to the town it came from.
Oh.
My favorite come out of the Crow's Nest Pass.
Okay.
Because the Crow's Nest Pass has a very Eastern European background.
Oh, okay.
And what I have found from some of my favorite ghost stories from the Crow's Nest Pass, there's almost an expectation that people will walk, but you will see them between the time they die and are buried. And I've got some great stories, and I think my favorite, I can't remember who told me, it's written down, but her brother-in-law, was it brother or brother-in-law died? And she saw him, and she's like, oh. And they were, just like, and he had a sweater on that she'd never seen. And after a while, she's talking to his wife, and the woman's not believing her at all. And she's like, and he was wearing this sweater. I've never seen it. And she described it. And I guess the other woman just stopped going, I bought him that for his birthday, never gave it to him. It's in a box under like the bed. And that was the sweater that he was wearing when she saw him after his death.
Well, it's awfully kind of him.
Yeah, he must have liked the sweater,
nice.
went and checked out.
Sure.
And that is like, I mean, so you can't really make something like that up when you describe perfectly a sweater that nobody has seen.
Yeah, that's a little difficult. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And a few others like that. And people, in the old hospital there, there's some great stories from the Crow's Nest Pass with ghost stories.
Just out of curiosity, and I'm sure there probably is. So right now we're overlooking essentially the intertribal, the site of the last intertribal war battle on the North American continent. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Any stories of First Nations ghosts or anything like that?
I've heard people with drumming and things like that.
Okay.
And it's always interesting because I would love to collect some of the stories. I've had one person say, be careful because when you tell ghost stories, you bring on ghosts. And they're trying to get me connected with people who can tell me the stories because, again, even if they know it, they can't tell me them.
Yeah, that's really,
So there certainly are, but I haven't found out about as much as I would like to.
Fair deal.
The other one in the River Valley, I've heard about a gentleman in gray dripping wet, and it's quite funny because people who tell me these things don't always know history. And then the first time I heard that, I'm like, "You're kidding, right?" They're like, "No, we saw him. It was foggy. He was wet and walking in the gray." I'm like, "It's Nicholas Sharon trying to get home." Because he drowned.
Oh, did he really? Right. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
He drowned up the river and sort of like around the old Fort Kipp area, helping the mounted police cross. And his cabin was here by where Whoop Up Dry Bridge is. And I'm like, to me immediately, and I mean, he's not like he said, I'm Nicholas Sharon. Yeah. But to me, it was like, he's trying to get home. And so they looked at me like I was crazy. And when I told them the story, they're like, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So... Sometimes that's what I love when you can kind of find a reason for why that ghost story might exist.
Yeah. Well, I got one for you.
Okay.
So apparently there is one in this house. Apparently, Bev names him Colin.
Oh.
Something about the cats and wouldn't go into a certain part of the basement. But to be honest with you, Colin, if you want, you can say something on here. But I've never really heard anything that would, certainly nothing that was untoward. I've lived in a few houses where my cousins and that have seen things or heard things or whatever. Ghosts don't like me very much. I think they're pissed off or they don't like me all that much or something because they don't usually, manifest to me. 2 doors down was either the general store or the mayor's house. Not really sure.
Okay.
A couple doors down from here. So I have a friend that works at the college, and she owned that house for several years and never reported anything, never anything. So about a year ago, this place just 2 doors down here flipped to a young couple, and I guess the way I understand it is, my friend at the college, when they moved in, there were these old cool pictures, and I think she thought they were probably the original residents of the house, and they were still on the wall. And there was an old steamer trunk in the basement. Well, apparently the first thing these folks did down the way is they moved the steamer trunk out and got rid of the pictures. Well, now they apparently, as scared the ever-living crap out of the lady that lived there, is, stuff's flying off the walls. There's kids laughing upstairs when the kids aren't upstairs. So there you go. That might be an interesting story.
I might have to go knocking on doors.
I was just 2 doors down, and I heard about. Well, it's interesting because we were. I can't remember where we were standing out here, but the couple and we actually just chatted a little bit, and I'd mentioned, jokingly something about the ghost in the house, and they said, "Don't kid about that. We've got some problems going on right now. A little bit more malevolent, than things that some other stories that I've heard. Like I'd heard about George and whatever at the museum, and I hadn't heard of some of the others, but and I did hear about some ones at U-Haul, but didn't know any specifics on it. But that might be an interesting one to.
Well, there are some great things about why ghosts haunt. Like people have all kinds. And, a lot of times it used to be they had a purpose. Like you had to find the hidden treasure, the gold, or somebody murdered them. And so, it's kind of interesting because if it doesn't start until something is moved, it's like, I'd be buying that steamer trunk and bringing it back.
Yeah. Well, and you remember that show, what was it? Unsolved Mysteries. I remember actually the one show that I actually remember from that was that there was, it was something to do with a renovation. So nothing had been going on in this house, and it was cool. And then this family came, and they decided to renovate the place. Well, all this stuff started happening. They saw a guy in the window, and they were outside raking leaves or whatever. So they packed up and left. And they got to a new place, and they'd been taking pictures, and the son of a bitch had followed them. But, it's interesting because Pat Robertson was apparently on there today saying, used clothing stores, or the demons that are attached to the people in the used clothing stores might be following you from the used clothing store. So there you go. Maybe Pat Robertson might have some.
I don't know, Pat, but wouldn't the child labor that's making our clothes anyways attach itself?
I would think so. Yeah.
So how is new clothes somehow sacred? And I got to follow up. I know somebody who claims to have caught a shape of a person, from what I understand, in the eternal flame when they were doing work on the eternal flame.
Over here.
I know.
Oh.
He told me about it briefly, and I haven't had a chance to email him going, you've got to send me that picture.
So do you have, do people send you pictures?
Not very often.
No?
For me, it's mostly stories, but this is one they claim to have.
Okay.
I have seen some very weird ones, like a pair of boots that somebody died in. There was like a face beside it. I know.
This isn't like Virgin Mary and the toast kind of thing.
No.
Okay.
Again, you can see things if you want to see things.
Sure. Yeah.
But I've seen some weird ones. I think one of my favorite, though, there were some beautiful trees out in front of the museum. And they were getting older, of course, and they also wanted to put the road there, so they knocked the trees down. And a photographer was out there one day taking pictures, and it was night. And he says he got orbs, which many people, of course, think are spirits. And he says, if you want to get in the picture, if you want to come, everybody show yourself. He says they got a whole bunch of them. And he came in the next day to show me the pictures. And he's like, you won't believe where the biggest orb was. And I'm like, oh, I can tell you. Upper right-hand corner of the old building, right? He's like, yeah, how'd you know? I said, that's my office. Because when I do take psychics through, I always ask them, what's the most active part? Like, where do you feel it?
Yeah.
And many have said, that room there. I'm like, oh, darn.
Well, you're perfectly situated.
If they would just clean my desk, like be useful. But it's quite funny for some reason. And I've had other staff think I was in my office. They've heard things moving around, and they're talking to me and get upset that I'm not there, and I'm not there.
Anything like moved around? Anything out of place ever?
You got to understand the way I keep my office. You wouldn't be able to tell.
The ghosts.
It could have just slid.
Fair enough. So, do you do the cemetery tours all year round?
We start up usually July and August for the daytime.
Okay.
The school programs, we go whenever we can, nice weather. So we start in April with classes.
Cool.
And then for the flashlight, I do them just late September, October.
Sure, Halloween time.
Well, we keep them away from Halloween. We have to stop a week in advance.
Oh.
It's just, like, I've seen some people do them at like midnight, and I can't stay up that late. Okay. So I need it to be dark enough early.
No wonder you can't see any ghosts. They only come out at night.
Oh, yeah, right. But I'm not going to do it in March, because that's when the same time,
Sure.
kind of. So October is wonderful. And if people make connections to Halloween, I'm not making connections to Halloween.
Fair enough. Any other stories you'd want to share?
Oh, good heavens. Let me think of a good one that I haven't told anybody. I won't cheat or anything. Oh, here's one I love, just because it's so funny. Sure. 1960s, the old Fleetwood School got a legend about the blue ghost. Children reported this blue lights that they would see. And the story got around town that, like they'd throw rocks at the ghost, and the ghost would throw rocks back at them.
Seriously?
And yes, and supposedly a kid even went to hospital because of interactions with the ghost. And it got so bad that the Lethbridge Herald actually sent a reporter and a photographer to see if they could track down the ghost of Fleetwood School. And so they're out there on 9th Avenue, and they hear it rustling and realize it's a dog. And all of a sudden, they're both just petrified. They see the blue light.
Oh?
And they're staring at it, and they realize it's the moon.
So who was on the other side of the moon throwing rocks? That's what I don't know.
I think, again, children. But that one was funny because it was such a build-up, and they're like, yeah, there was no ghost.
Oh. That's sad.
Well, you have to have some of those, too.
I guess so.
Every so often, they're not in any way true.
Well, and see, that's and that's what bugs me, though, Belinda, is that you get people that latch onto the ones that are, obviously not true, right? And they say, well, see, look, all ghost stories can be explained away that way. Well, no, not necessarily. I mean...
Well, and there's some that are completely weird.
Sure.
I love Cottonwood Park. Cottonwood is one of the very far west side parks.
Okay.
And there's an area of town, and it's been described for me that most of the park is completely normal. You hear birds, there's sounds, but there's a part in what they call the real wooded area that it's deadly silent. People say you don't hear birds, you don't hear anything. It's just silent there.
Okay.
And anybody I've heard who's gone through there, get through there as fast as possible as they can. Because I've heard repeated weird stories, and I don't know what accounts for that. There's another one. I don't know if you joggers love between Whoop Up Drive and Highway 3, the west side under the high level bridge.
Oh yeah.
People love jogging.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, I don't jog, but I wouldn't go there because I can tell you 4 people who died there for various reasons.
Okay.
And I know somebody who was jogging there, and all of a sudden the grass beside her started to divide as if there was a person running beside her. And she's like, what is it, an animal? What is it? But there was nothing. So she decided she'd run faster, and so did it.
Huh.
And so all of a sudden she just took off. But it's one of the creepiest things. She said she had a running partner, and the grass was dividing as if there was another person right there beside her.
Was it a snake?
It was going same space as her,
and
it was like a person was moving the grass. And a snake usually you can't see the grass move when a snake's going through.
Okay.
So this was that was one of the creepier ones.
Creepy.
So there's some outdoor really good park ones too.
Yeah.
I can make almost every swimming pool something you don't want to use.
Seriously?
Well, Nicholas Sharon drowned, and we named a swimming pool after him.
Right. Okay. Yes. Right. True.
And we've only had one execution ever within the city of Lethbridge.
Oh, I didn't even know we had one. Okay.
But before the jail was built, a man named Walsall Chobiter. Walsall Chobiter's girlfriend just convinced him to murder her husband.
Okay.
There's something going on there. And he did. He killed Alex Lazaruk and was executed for the murder. And she got nothing. She got her husband gone, her boyfriend gone, but that's a different story. By British tradition, they had to bury him as close to the gallows as possible.
Okay.
So they actually dug his grave under the gallows, so he dropped into his own grave.
Convenient.
Right?
Yeah.
And they did the execution in the stable yard of the mounted police.
Okay.
Well, if you know about the mounted police, they've never moved since 1886.
So they're still just downtown.
Yeah. So that whole area that is Yates and the old courthouse and City Hall and the curling rink, etc., was all the barracks at one point.
Okay.
So he was executed there and buried right there. And what's on top of his grave today? Fritzig's swimming pool.
Interesting.
So they say if you see strange bubbles in the water, it's Wazzle saying hello.
What about the university pool?
Anything no, nothing good at
nothing in
Maxbell,
there.
so
Okay. All the ghosts are down the hill.
Exactly. Haven't ruined every swimming pool, but there's something about our swimming pools that we do some strange things with them.
Interesting.
I mean, I don't think I'd ever name a swimming pool after a man who drowned.
Yeah, that's a little morbid.
Yeah, but the policy is you name everything after one person.
Yeah.
And of course, they just didn't know their history well enough.
That's like the Titanic Yacht Club.
That's exactly.
The same thing. Yeah. So, just out of curiosity, to have you on again, could we do like a podcast on one of the cemetery tours? Would you allow that?
I don't think why we couldn't.
Okay. That'd be cool. It'd be cool to actually do a digital version of that, if that's okay
Sure.
with you. Yeah. Do you do it on your own, or is that with somebody?
With the cemetery tours are through the Galt Museum.
Okay.
So I would probably have to double check, but I can't think why they would mind.
Okay.
As long as you don't get every one of my good stories.
Fair deal. Do you do any like storytelling sessions or anything like that at the?
No. Because,
nothing regular?
Well, no, because I'm so busy with the students. I see over 11,000 students a year.
Oh my God. Okay. That's a
So
lot.
between that and my writing, if I hadn't invented the 26-hour day, I'd have problems.
Wow. That's wild. Well, Belinda, I appreciate you taking the time and being on the podcast here, and we can maybe catch up with you down the road here. Yeah, let me know if you talk to the neighbors, because I'm curious about that now. I'm fascinated about that. So yeah.
Well, that malevolence is not something Lethbridge usually has. So I'd love to know what.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
We're nice people.
Well, yeah, usually.
Even